Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Growth Capital Podcast. I'm your host, Justin Dixon, and today we've got Scott Wharton on the podcast. He is the CEO of Tandem PV, which is a solar panel manufacturer here in California, in the U.S. Scott is the CEO, as I mentioned, and we dive really deep into the solar world, what makes their solar panels different than the ones on the market. And actually, they're selling to more utility scale solar providers versus individuals that put solar on their roof. So we talk a lot about that. It's actually kind of perfect timing with all the tariffs going on and a lot of the solar components coming from China. So we dig super deep into solar, why he thinks it's the kind of energy source of the now and of the future. And we also talk a lot about just scaling a business. They raised a little bit of capital earlier this year. So we talk about kind of what their plans are for deploying that capital into their business. So really fascinating episode. So let's get Scott on the pod. Interested in hearing conversations with private equity leaders, CEOs of private equity-backed companies, and startup entrepreneurs where they share their stories about their career journeys, starting, investing in, and scaling successful businesses, and the important role that having the right talent plays in building a successful business, then you are in the right place. Welcome back to another episode of the Growth Capital Podcast. Here's your host, Justin Dixon. All right, Scott, thank you for being on the podcast. Really excited to jump into this one.
Great to be here.
Awesome. Well, I guess before we jump in and maybe give the audience a little bit of an overview of who you are, where you are, and what you're up to right now.
So I'm Scott Wharton. I'm the CEO of Tandem PV. We're based here in Silicon Valley. And I would describe myself as a serial entrepreneur junkie. This is my fifth startup scale-up in a row. So I did two early stage companies in the voice over IP telecom space, which both IPO'd. And then I founded the world's first cloud video conferencing service. So I like to say 3 years before Zoom. So I had the right idea, but I was a little early, had a nice exit. Then I took my wife I took my kids out of school, and my wife and I traveled around the world for a year with a little bit more than a carry-on. Holding the other story, perhaps. So when I came back, my wife said, "Would you mind not doing another startup?" So I went to a company called Logitech, which you probably all know from our mice and keyboards and webcams.
Right.
I took a small group to over $1 billion a year building an world's biggest enterprise video conferencing hardware business. So before I came here, I was running a $2 billion business. And I think I had this great opportunity to kind of more focus on climate change, build something out in solar. And I think this will be the biggest thing I've done yet, which I'm sure we'll be talking about.
Yeah. Well, no. So there's a lot to unpack there, and definitely want to touch on the traveling around the world kind of thing with the family, because that's also super interesting. But I guess back to Tandem. I guess how did you get introduced to them? And it sounds like you maybe had some interest in solar, but like how did the intro happen, and how did Tandem get started? Because I don't think you're a founder or co-founder. You're brought in kind of post kind of funding or founding of the company.
Yeah, the company's been around for about 9 years. The two founders both have their PhDs from Stanford in material science and applied physics. And combined, they've got about 50 years experience in solar. So a very deeply experienced team. I came in a little less than 2 years ago to help convert the company from being an R&D company to being a commercialization company with products and revenue. So interesting, I just got back from my MBA reunion literally yesterday. And What I did my MBA internship, I did it in solar, and this was back in the 90s. And most of my colleagues were getting rich doing management consulting and banking. So it was a very weird thing to do at the time. And I love solar, but quite frankly, it was just too early. So I've been monitoring the industry for a long time, maybe looking for the right opportunity to get back into it. So about 2.5 years ago, I was at a conference in Germany and speaking there, and I ran into a venture capitalist. And as I usually do, I said, "Tell me about your portfolio." And he said, "Oh, I've got this solar thing." And I go, "Tell me more about it." He goes, "It's perovskites." And I said, "What's a perovskite?" That's probably many of the people here are thinking to themselves. So as I learned more about it, I realized that it was this incredible opportunity to basically reinvent solar. And the company wasn't looking for a CEO, but I would say it was like kind of a one thing led to another where I got more excited about what they were doing. And I think they realized that I could add value to helping commercialize and scale the company. So I started, like I said, July of 23, having a great time. We're scaling up, raising money, building a factory. We'll talk about all that. But that's kind of the genesis of how I got back. So I'm 2 years back into the solar industry, but I like to say I've been working on it for decades and really came full circle.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious because a lot of the kind of founders and startup founders I talk to are fairly technical people, right? Typically, you got an idea for whether it's a software or hardware or whatever, and then at some point, those people may not always be the best people to be the front facing, to the outside world to raise money. Like obviously, they've got the technical ability. So, how did you kind of convince or talk to the two co-founders that seemingly are probably more on the kind of tech and product side? To say, hey, like this may make sense for me to come in, having more of a business go to market, raising money kind of lens. Like, how do those conversations go?
I think it was a couple of things. So one of the things that I've typically done with companies is rather than come in and say, you're going to hire me or you want to work with me, I usually, my standard offer is I'll help you for free. Let me do some advisory work for you. And I think the reason why that works is, usually when you're a founder or CEO, there's so many people coming at you with offers, and it's hard to really know what's real or what's not, what people's incentives are, and whether people are going to offer any value or whether they have some interest. So what I've typically done is say, look, I don't want anything from you. I'm just gonna give something back. And if it works out, great. If it doesn't, fine. So you kind of lower the barrier to entry and risk. And I did the same thing in this case where I just started helping advise them. And I think what they realized is, one, I had been following the industry for a long time. So I wasn't just this guy who came out of nowhere, didn't know anything about it. Like I didn't know as much as they did. But I knew quite a bit about the industry. And then I thought, based on my background, I think they realized that there was a complement in the experience. And I think the last thing is that the founder is a brilliant guy, or both founders are brilliant. The CEO, I think, realized that his heart was really more in the science and being in the lab. And as much as he wanted to be the CEO, doing marketing and fundraising, all that stuff, I think if you're a science person of science, it's not as interesting as building great technology. So it's really a good fit.
And then, so how did after you kind of did some free advisory work and then transitioned to the CEO kind of route, and you mentioned kind of trying to pivot them from being more of an R&D to actually being like a business and all of that. How did that happen? Like, what were some of the things that you kind of implemented? And then obviously, there needs to be money that's coming in to help kind of fund those endeavors.
Yeah. So one of the first things I did is help raise some more money because we were going to run out of money, it's sometime in the near term. So I was able to come in and use my networks and contacts to bring in some money. So that was number one, just stabilizing things. Number two is try to figure out, all right, not just what we're building from a technology point of view, but what product are we building? What is our go-to-market strategy? So I think we spent some time on that early on. And I think what I found in this industry, a lot of people are just building core components. But what we pivoted and decided to do is we're going to build a full product, so a full solar panel, not a component or a cell. And we're going to sell them directly to utility scale customers. So it's a pretty strong focus. And what I'd say, a lot of our competitors are basically saying, oh, I'll just build a component and I'll sell to everyone. And I think they grossly underestimate how hard the go-to-market part is and the focus is. So I think that's helped us really make a lot of progress in this one particular category and also provide some clarity whether it's right or not. You find out, but at least we know exactly what we're doing, what our go-to-market strategy, who our customers are, what we're building, et cetera. And then the last thing I'd say is taking that foundation and seeing if there's product market fit, which I think we've established now with our customers, and then bringing in a team that would more complement the team. So more people on the R&D side to help accelerate things. And then bring in people who are more on the commercialization, operation, manufacturing side so that you can start building stuff. Because at the end of the day, the company is going to be valued on how much we sell for products, not if we have great R&D records.
Right. So how did the kind of, or maybe talk a little bit about, and again, I'm not a scientist or a solar aficionado. So maybe how does your solar panel better, different than, I live in Austin, Texas. A lot of houses around here have solar. It also sounds like you're not selling to a homeowner, right? You're not selling to me. You're selling to more large scale, more utility scale. So maybe talk about the product itself a little bit as far as how it's similar or different to what I'm familiar with in my brain versus, and then also like how selling to a utility scale, like what the value is for them.
Yeah, so we're building on a technology called a perovskite, good cocktail party word, named after Dr. Perovsky, who A friend of his discovered it a couple hundred years ago. He's sounds Russian. He was, and it's a very common crystal structure in the Earth's crust. In fact, if you we don't do any mining, but if you go 400 miles down to the Earth's crust, I think it's over 90% of the world's crust is perovskites. It's very common, even though most people haven't heard about it. So basically, it's a miracle semiconductor, and the greatest hits are 200 times thinner than traditional silicon panels. So it's basically 1/100th the width of one of your hairs. And it doesn't use any rare earth metals or minerals, no mining. So in fact, we can make it in a lab in California. Oh, wow. And part of what that means is that we can take the supply chain, which today 95% of the supply chain for silicon panels comes from China, and reestablish it and, quite frankly, leapfrog it to the United States, where we could take leadership. The other thing about it is that it only uses about 10% of the energy. So fundamentally, it's got better economics and physics than silicon panels. So what we do is, the reason why the company is called Tandem is we essentially create a solar panel sandwich. So we take this perovskite layer, we put it on the glass that's already there to protect the solar panel, and then we take these off-the-shelf silicon cells and we put them on the bottom. And the combination of those two actually captures a lot more of the light spectrum than you do from either one. So for example, today the average in the US is about 21% efficiency, so about 1 out of 5 beams of light gets captured in terms of energy. We're at 28%, getting to 30. So it's almost a 30 to 40% improvement, which is huge in the energy space. So for our customers, the value for them is that today only about 20% of the cost is in the panel. So for decades and decades, solar panels were expensive and we were riding down the cost curve. Today, they're relatively inexpensive, and most of the costs in a solar deployment for a solar farm is the labor, the land, the installation, all the electronics to go around it. So part of our value is actually saving on the costs that matter more. So we can even charge a small premium if we wanted to and still be the cheapest energy source overall, because of that total cost of ownership savings. So the value for our customers, I would say, is domestic panel. You get to have much more energy in a smaller footprint. And the nice thing about this particular market segment is that there are only, there's about 20 of these customers in the world that do about 90% of the energy. So we don't need to have 1,000 customers. Like, we really need a handful of them to go to, and they're sophisticated. And one thing I just want to add is because you talked about rooftops, 82% of all deployments of solar in the US are actually in solar farms. Like, rooftops are actually pretty small. Like, residential is less than 10%.
And you said there's only 20 utility scale customers that you're selling into or could sell into in the US. Is that right? Is that what you said?
Well, there are a lot of them, but it's like the Pareto rule, 80-20. So the majority of the deployments happen with a small number of big players.
Got it. And then so your panel is more efficient, I guess, from a cost perspective, because you can make this in a lab, right? You don't have to mine, drill. You don't have the supply chain issues with, obviously, talking about stuff coming from China. There's a lot of tariff talk at the moment. Right now, we're recording this in early May 2025. So, everybody has tariffs on their brain. So does that make your panel less expensive than a traditional solar panel from a manufactured cost perspective?
Well, definitely from a tariff point of view, the fact that we're manufacturing in the US and there are current incentives that are pretty popular, I would say, in a bipartisan way, because a lot of the benefits for these deployments happen. 85% of the benefits today go to Republican congressional districts. So there's a lot of bipartisan support for that. I expect that will continue. And there are new tariffs, both the ones that the president announced, but also ones based on anti-dumping rules, that really raise the cost of some of these panels that are being dumped in the US. We can talk about that. And the fact that we do actually add a little bit of cost, because we add this, essentially it's a 1 millimeter layer of ink that we put on glass. So you add a little bit of cost to it, but the marginal cost that you add is lower than all the added energy that we add. So the average cost comes down because the cost that you're adding is less than the benefit that you're adding, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And then, so as you're kind of scaling this business, and obviously you've been there for 2 years, you just announced that you raised a bunch of money earlier this year. So congratulations on that. How does you mentioned that you've also had a lot of scale up startup experience as well as big business and everything. How does this kind of similar, different than some of the experiences that you've had in the past? And maybe what are some challenges that you faced with this particular go around that you weren't anticipating when you were, just on the advisory side before you kind of jumped into the CEO role?
I guess, part of what's similar is human nature is similar in every business. So there's almost always a pecking order where you have early adopters of technology and then, middle adopters and late adopters. And I think that's true of this case where you have to find the people who are looking for things in the early applications. I've sold to telecom before, so we can have a debate about who's more risk averse, a telco or a utility. But they're both big companies that I would say are very sophisticated, but they're risk averse. So you have to find the people who are going to deploy first and give them enough of a value prop. Probably what's different is there's more public policy and tariff and regulations in this space, so there's more to think about there. And I think that's partly because it's hardware, but partly because we have a unique situation where in this case you have one major actor, which are the Chinese players, where they have huge subsidies, where a lot of them get free land and cost of capital and labor. And you look at their balance sheets or their financial statements, and it looks like they have certain costs, but I would say, yeah, you could live in Manhattan for very cheaply if your parents gave you free housing and food and everything. So
Right.
it's not really apples to apples. So we do need, if you want to have an industry in this area or cars or in batteries, you have to have some balancing that out because the other side plays by different rules.
And when because you're based in California, right, in Silicon Valley, was that by choice, by just kind of necessity, because that's where you all lived, or was there some reason or incentive to, building because you're building a manufacturing or have a manufacturing center there in Santa Clara, I think, or in that general vicinity?
Yeah, I guess there's a personal answer and then there's a company answer. So I grew up in New York City, and my wife had lived in California. She was trying to drag me out here. So the first startup I did was in the East Coast in New Jersey, and then she wanted to move to California, and then I got recruited by the startup in the DC area. So I told her, "Hey, honey, we'll do the startup for a year or two. It's going to fail, and then we'll move out to California." And then 9 years later, we had a house and two kids, and the company was getting ready to go public. And she's like, "Dude, what happened to the California plan?"
What happened to this failure you promised me, right?
Exactly. It didn't happen. So that's when we moved out here, and we thought, all right, if we're going to do a startup, why don't we move to Silicon Valley?
Yeah.
So we've been out here 17 years, and I just love being out here. The innovation culture, the weather, et cetera. The genesis of this company is that the founders actually both grew up in Texas, but had both gone to Stanford. Okay. Had established themselves in Silicon Valley. And I think if you're going to do a deep tech disruptive company, Silicon Valley is as good a place as any to do it. Why are we building manufacturing here? I think that's kind of counterintuitive, because I think that if you're doing something really innovative and hard, the farther away your teams are, the R&D team from the manufacturing team, you're going to be slower. You're going to have cultural issues. And maybe your engineers don't want to fly to some place in the middle of nowhere and spend all their time where. So what we're doing is there's a triangle saying of three things you can optimize. There's quality, cost, and speed. Yep. And usually what they say is you can only get one or two of them max. We're optimizing right now speed and quality over cost. And what we're doing is we're going to shut down the current R&D facility, and we're going to move everybody into the same building. So manufacturing, R&D under one roof, we're all in it together. And the goal is not to prove out the unit economics. The goal is to prove out that the product works on full scale, and that the customers will buy it. Once we do that, then we'll get something that's probably, 1 million square feet, Elon Musk style gigafactory. But that we won't do that in California.
Got it. No, I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think, being where in the industry that I'm in, kind of working with startups from a talent perspective, some of my clients are very much, they're open to a distributed workforce. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Others are very adamant that they need talent, in one specific location. And so you're kind of one in an area where there's a lot of smart, innovative, technology focused people. So you're not building your plant in a remote market and then trying to find talent locally, right? So you're saying, okay, let's go where the talent is. And obviously the very convenient thing is the three of you already live in that general vicinity. So it makes sense. But it sounds like if you are when you scale then you may switch to a more lower cost of kind of investment in that area to kind of scale out. Is that kind of the thought process?
Yeah, I think that's right. I'd also say that we've already kind of moved to somewhat of a hybrid role in that if you're building a factory, it's manufacturing. You need to be in the office and because you're physically building things. But if you're doing commercialization or software or some other things, you don't necessarily need to be here. And quite frankly, even in Silicon Valley, not everybody is within 20-minute commuting distance of your office. So we've already started moving to a little bit more of a hybrid where, there are some people, if you're in finance and operations and other things, you don't need to be in the office 5 days a week. But, every once in a while is good. And I came from a video conferencing background, so I have both a great appreciation for video conferencing, but I also have an appreciation of the value of, hey, when you're in the office and you bump into people, there are different levels of conversations than you have over video. So it's a little bit of a mix.
Yeah. Now that you guys have this this location that you're building and you've got this funding that you raise, like what's the next level? Or is it we need to hire a bunch of people and bring them to kind of escalate our R&D and our growth and how we can kind of move to more of a commercialization effort? Is that kind of the next kind of level of kind of growth that you're looking at right now?
Yeah, so we're scaling up some of our hiring, but because we're going to have the R&D and manufacturing together, we're going to use a bunch of the R&D people as leads on the manufacturing side. So we're going to try to keep the team relatively small and lean. And our main goal right now is to basically go from having a solar panel that's about the size of an iPad to the size of a door. So we just bought a whole bunch of tools for tens of millions of dollars. That's part of why we're raising this money to build out a factory that's the size of like a football stadium. It's still small by solar factory size, but football stadium's pretty big, right?
Yeah.
And then very clear, build that, start selling products to initial customers, and then we'll be able to raise money. It should be at a lot more attractive rates because we'll have de-risked the technology, the customer demand, et cetera. And then our goal would be to build something out that'd be more like I said, like a gigafactory that Elon has at billions of dollars of revenue a year scale.
Yeah.
So hard, but pretty simple in terms of knowing what we need to do.
Yeah, the path is there. It's just a matter of execution and finding the right talent and partners and all of that. I'm curious about the capital raising side. The last few years, a lot of startups have died because they weren't able to raise money and maybe they overraised in the beginning and overspent. And there's a big debate about all of that. But just with the private equity groups that I work with and even some of the VCs, there hasn't been a lot of deal flow from, people buying and selling. And then I've talked to a lot of founders that they've had challenges with raising. Like, what was your experience, over the last kind of 6-8 months? Because I'm assuming I think you've closed a round in March of this year. And so, obviously you were raising for a handful of months. Like, what was your experience with that?
Yeah, it was pretty shitty. It was really hard. It's a very difficult time.
Pretty shitty.
That's the technical term. It's pretty hard raising money right now overall, unless you have AI in your name. And then when you're building hardware and solar, particularly hard. I think our story and our team and our technology was compelling enough that we were able to ultimately raise money. But I tell people my batting average was pretty terrible. But the good news is you only need a handful of people that believe in you. And the good news is we were able to achieve that. So our lead investor is a company called Eclipse. They're a VC in Palo Alto that focuses on manufacturing. And what I love about them is they $5 billion fund. The lead investor had probably more experience than any VC in the world in solar manufacturing. So they really got what we were doing. And so I would say part of the advice I would give people is one of my last companies, I think I talked to 20 VCs and it was very hard. I didn't raise VC money, so I did other things. This time I probably talked to 10 times as many. I think one of the lessons in life is that sometimes it's times at bat. Yeah. Like how many times do you go out there and, it's not always trying hard. Sometimes it's about getting off the floor and dusting yourself off and just finding the right fit for someone that really believes in you. And sometimes it just takes a long time. And I have a couple other friends that went through similar experiences.
It's people trying to raise money in 2021 much different than raising money right now, right? Like if you had a startup and you had SaaS, and this is even kind of a little bit before kind of AI was really mainstream, everybody is raising money and raising it at crazy valuations. And I think so if you had that experience of, pretty much people coming to you to give you money versus in this instance, to your point, a lot of times it is a little bit of how many at bats have you had? How many no's have you had? The oldest saying is every no is closer to the yes kind of a thing. So yeah, it kind of makes sense. When it comes to AI, it's kind of hard to not talk about AI, but being in a physical product, in the solar space, is AI maybe integrated more when you're looking at R&D to make you help think through ideas or evaluate the market, or how are you leveraging AI, in your current situation?
Yeah, so a lot of what we do in R&D is we pull a lot of data off of our test panels, and we look for insights about and correlations and how to do things faster. So today, most of that is done through human intelligence and brute force. What we're building now is a bunch of data and analytics and machine learning to complement that. I think we'll do more and more of that over time. Ultimately, I see it as something where you can take the internal learnings and insights and you can expose them to customers, because they're going to want to have some similar insights, not just in the R&D performance of the panels, but how are they working out in the field and how can they optimize their energy performance and utilization. So I think there is a real need for AI and software, and we're probably at the very beginnings of cultivating that, partly because in order to make that work, you actually need some good data. So a lot of what we've been doing is spending time in collecting more data and quality data so that you have the ability to analyze it. And then I would say the second thing is a lot of our demand in the future is going to be driven by AI. So if you think about if I oversimplify it, the US electrification demand's been pretty flat for a long time. And I think the assumption was, well, we'll just do this transition from dirty energy to clean energy and there'll be a replacement. Now I think we know that's absolutely wrong, that there's a huge boom in electricity. A lot of it is driven by AI. We're probably just at the early beginnings of needing more energy for AI, because I think that, as Sam Altman and other people said, the biggest bottleneck right now for AI performance is actually electricity. So, and if I give the audience some insight into how to solve this problem, it's really only going to be solar and batteries to solve it in the near future, and I'll tell you why. People talk about all the above, but nuclear power is way too expensive on the fission side. So nobody's essentially building new nuclear powers in the plants in the U.S. Fusion is not ready, despite all the funding that you see. It's a while away, and even when it is ready, nobody's even talking yet about how expensive it's going to be. It's going to be very expensive. These small modular reactors, or SMRs, don't really exist yet, and when they are, they're not going to have economies of scale. They're small, so they're not going to be ready this decade. Wind is challenging with the current administration. Coal is unfinanceable because nobody believes it'll be around in 30 years. So then leaves natural gas. And natural gas actually has a 4 to 5 year backlog in even ordering a turbine. And then you need to install it and get a permit. So we're not talking about early 2030s for gas. So if you want AI to have any power this decade, you really only have solar and batteries. The good news is those things are available and easily scalable, and they're the cheapest energy source. So just to throw out another stat, in January and February, 98% of all new energy in the US came from solar and wind.
Wow. So
people talk about all the above, but really solar is what's driving the US economy. Most of that's in the South, where it's sunny in red states. And what we're going to do is make it even more cost effective and cheaper, because when you run a data center, usually they're closer to a customer population. And it's where real estate and labor is expensive. So our value prop, I think, is even higher on the AI side. So I think even though we're building a hardware thing, a lot of our demand is going to be driven by AI.
Yeah. It was one thing, being in Texas, there's always a debate about energy sources and all of that fun stuff here. Seeing that we have our own kind of grid, which, fails from time to time. But the argument or the comment I get a lot or hear a lot is around, storing and transporting electricity, which is, we've got a very old grid, across the US, not just in Texas, but how do you think about like the storage and the movement? Cause you can't just create a pipeline like you can with natural gas or oil or whatever. Like you've got to put it in big batteries, and that's, something that has been challenging, I guess. But is that closer to reality than I'm aware of?
I think one of the things interesting is this has been moving so fast that even the experts, when you hear them on TV, don't know what the hell they're talking about. So
Got it.
just a couple of things to back that up. So in the last 10 years alone, solar is 90% cheaper than it was. Batteries are 70% cheaper. I think we know more about that inherently because you can see it in our cars
Yeah.
where the costs are coming down. So that now we're at the point now where batteries and solar are cheaper. And the fact that both of them keep getting cheaper and better mean that there's like a flywheel. And also on the battery side, they used to last 2 hours, then 4, now they're 8. And then now there are longer term battery solutions for weeks or months. So the two of them kind of reinforce each other to the point where my prediction is sometime in the 2030s, you'll only have solar and batteries for new energy. You won't even see any of this other stuff. Now, it doesn't mean we get rid of the grid we have. We're going to continue to use it. And I think what Germany and other places did where they shut down nuclear and other things was stupid because we need all the energy we can get. But in terms of the new incremental energy, I think people just don't realize how inexpensive and cheap batteries and solar are compared to coal and other things. They're expensive. You have to keep fueling them all the time, and you got to run them, and they're not simple. So
Yeah.
and that's why and then there's the rhetoric of the current political environment, and then there's the reality. So the rhetoric is obviously very negative. The reality is, if you look at Texas, Texas is actually the biggest deployer of solar in the U.S. So for California, for all of our rhetoric about being clean, has been eclipsed by Texas. Why? Because of their deregulation and focus on cost.
Yeah.
In fact, as somebody told me last night that in the oil industry in Texas, they're actually swapping out oil burning to power their local plants with solar and batteries because it's cheaper, and then they get to burn more oil and sell more oil to customers.
Got it. Interesting. Yeah. There's a lot of interesting kind of developments that are going on. Obviously you see all the big, oil and gas providers around the world are investing heavily in solar and other renewable resources. I'm curious a little bit about the international space because I have a friend who lives in the UK. He's got a recruiting business, but they only focus on clients that are in the renewable space, battery, solar, et cetera, et cetera. And so it seems like the international kind of landscape on solar and kind of the renewable space is a little bit more friendly or interested in it. Like, I'm curious kind of what your take is on, is your product something that is scalable and could be, kind of exported to, at least from a physical product perspective, be exported to, other countries? Is that kind of also part of the kind of go-to-market roadmap?
It certainly could be. So we're focused on the United States right now, just because it's the most attractive market from building in the U.S. with the current Inflation Reduction Act subsidies makes the U.S. effectively the cheapest place in the world to make things.
Yeah.
Which is probably counterintuitive, but the incentives are strong enough that if you're building a solar manufacturing plant, you really want to build it here in the U.S. first. And then the second thing is because of the tariffs, the prices are higher than other places, so it makes it the most attractive first market to compete in. And there's plenty of demand for us to be able to sell here for the foreseeable future. There are some countries around the world where they don't have tariffs, and because, like I said earlier, the Chinese sell well below cost, it's probably harder to compete there until some of these places address their issues. On the other side, I want to talk about China for a minute, just even their own internal usage, because what's interesting is China is making huge progress in cleaning up their economy and their grid. So a couple of stats on that. So last year, China rolled out about 300 gigawatts of solar in 2024. That is more than the United States has rolled out in the last 68 years since solar was invented. China was trying to get to have a peak carbon emissions by 2030. It looks like they're going to hit it this year and start shrinking in their emissions, partly because so much solar. The other thing that's interesting about China is that they're actually not really building any new coal plants anymore. They're building mostly solar and wind and batteries. And some people say, well, isn't China doing a lot of nuclear because they don't have the regulatory constraints that we have in the U.S.? Actually, the answer is no. So China went from 1.7% of their energy coming from nuclear to 1.3. So it's actually shrinking. They're still doing more nuclear than we are, but it's shrinking. But why? Because it's not economical. So they're doing solar, wind, and batteries, and about the rough percentage as we are. So they're doing about 90% of all new energy, solar, wind, and batteries, about 60% of solar. Ironically, it's about the same as the U.S.
That's fascinating. Yeah, there's Yeah, more stats than I'm aware of. Obviously, you're super deep in this space, so it's just it's interesting, kind of what you read, and then some of the data that is actually out there. I guess as you think about kind of the next 12 months, I always like to ask people what their kind of vision is, or if we jumped on a podcast a year from now, like what are some of the things that you in your current business would want to have achieved or done that would make that conversation in a year a positive one versus a negative.
Oh, it's what we have to do is very simple. Build a factory, which we're in the middle of doing. Take our product from the small scale that we have it to this larger scale, essentially the size of a door, engineering up. Start selling for revenue. If we do that, then it'll be a lot easier to raise money. We'll be in a much better position. We'll be scaling up, much faster than we are now. So we have to do these three things. We're all in and focused on that. It's very clear and very hard. So I think in a year from now, we'll have a very good sense of where we are with that.
Awesome. And, you've obviously had a lot of experience, and we didn't even have enough time to jump into some of your previous, startup experiences. I guess, were those more software based versus hardware?
Yeah. The irony is the first three companies I did were all software and cloud.
Okay.
And then when I went to Logitech, it was a hardware company, but I would really call it a software enabled hardware company. And then when I started, it was really all like cheap, very good hardware, like the stuff we're used to, mice, keyboard, and webcams. When I left, 80% of my team on the engineering side was software. So it was mostly about building an AI to kind of move the cameras around automatically, manage them, etc. So I used my software experience to build great AI software-enabled hardware. This is much more deep tech and hardware. So I guess I've been moving the opposite direction of everyone. As the world moves to more software, I've been moving to more hardware, more deep tech, more complicated stuff. I think part of the challenge for me is I get a little bored and I want to do something harder and then harder and then harder. And I certainly can do something easier than solar, but
right.
I think the world needs it.
Yeah, and it's also a passion for you, right? Obviously, it sounds like you've been kind of, keeping your eyes on the market for a long time, and now you have the opportunity, based on the experience that you've built over the last number of years, to be able to actually have a lot of impact. I'm curious, kind of for people that maybe are listening that have kind of a product idea versus a software idea, what's harder, easier, unique, about being in the software startup versus a hardware startup?
I mean, they're both hard in different ways. I'd say with hardware, it's a lot simpler to know what you're building. With software, there are a billion features and permutations. So almost having the unlimited freedom to code is hard because, like, what do you do? What do you build? Could be anything. So that is harder. I would say raising money for software is easier because you can take a team of 5 and get to revenue pretty quickly. Especially with hardware and deep tech, you need some 10 years before we have meaningful product revenue. And it takes a longer time. So on the fundraising side, venture capitalists prefer having businesses that get to market faster. So I think software is fundamentally easier to raise money for, and maybe even build a business that you can get to profitability, whereas we just need a lot more capital to build out physical things. But I think they're both fun and interesting, and they're just very different. And part of what I like is the variety of life and having a different experience. I'd say the other thing with hardware is that it's harder to get in, but the barriers to entry are quite high in being able to build that up. Whereas with software, part of the problem is someone sees something that you do, and then you have 50 new startups copying what you're doing and people flooding you with money. So you can get in faster, but it's harder to keep competition out because a lot of people can just copy you.
Yeah. Well, like you mentioned earlier, raising money, you have to have AI in your name, typically, right, to get any kind of like doors open. And so I feel like, to your point, like if I've talked to a lot of kind of recruitment software that has AI in it, and it's really just a chat bot or helps you write an email better. And so, yeah, it is. To your point, it's probably barrier of entry is harder. So if you can get past that initial barrier, it limits your competition because you're on the other side of the door, right? So it's harder to open that door versus a software. The door is pretty much open, and you just kind of jump into it, kind of a thing. So, very, very interesting. I want to kind of wrap up here with a little bit of I guess, from a go-to-market standpoint and kind of your next step. Obviously, you've got this plant that you're opening and kind of continuing to build out. I guess, what are some of the challenges when it comes to go-to-market, because you have more of a finite target customer, which obviously, if you've got endless opportunity, it's kind of harder even because you're just going to boil the ocean versus with you guys, it's very, who you need to go after. It's just, being able to break in that door. How are some of the go-to-market strategies, I think, a little bit different than maybe what you did in software? Because again, you can kind of sell to the masses versus selling to a handful of operators.
Well, I'd say even when I sold to telcos, the barriers to entry were high too. So in some ways they were similar. On the video conferencing side, a little different, that you could sell to small businesses before you got to the multinationals. I'd say part of it is if you want to get in with a bigger customer, you have to be way more compelling to get in. You can't be 10% better. I think that's probably true of software as well. But the reality is the inertia is a huge factor for why startups fail. Like good enough, sometimes good enough, 10, 20% is not good enough. The other thing is, I love this expression. I don't know where it came from, but are you selling a vitamin or a painkiller? Like and the vitamin is, yeah, it's good for you. You should take it. But if you stop taking it, you're fine. Painkiller is like, man, you are in pain. I have to have this. I think the problem with most startups is that they're selling vitamins, not painkillers. They get all enamored with the idea, but if someone doesn't have it, doesn't need it, and you're like, why don't they want something 10% better? It's like, because they don't care. Humans are lazy. So I think we're finding something that is compelling enough and painful enough that you have to get over the threshold. So I think 30% more power and savings is compelling in a very competitive market.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is just having something that is built in the US. I think that it's been bubbling below the surface for a while, but I think we realize now, like you look at Europe and the Germans said, oh, what could go wrong by buying all of our energy from Vladimir Putin? He's a nice guy. Right. Like he'll take care of us. We know how that story went. Today, it's even worse for the US. We get 95% of our core technology from China and solar. And solar, I told you, is already in the 90% of our new energy. So just from a national security point of view, I think we know that this is untenable. Now, how that plays out, I'm not really sure. But I think there is a bipartisan consensus now that you don't want the Chinese basically selling below costs and driving all of our companies out of business as they're doing and then going, oh, it's a free market. It's not a free market. And there are some things that I could argue maybe you don't need to make toys. Like that's not national security risk, but energy, that is.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of things around like what we don't want all of the manufacturing back. Like we want some of it, like, to your point, toys or T-shirts or whatever. Like we don't necessarily require that to be back here in the US. But yeah, there's a lot of like roads we can drive down when it comes to, what should or shouldn't we be focused on. I think solar is super fascinating. I think there's a lot of opportunity. I mean, the sun's there, right? So why not use it? But I guess as we kind of wrap this conversation up, because we could probably talk for another 30 minutes. We didn't get a chance to dive into your world travels with your family. We'll save that for another podcast. But I want to kind of wrap up here with a 3-pack of questions that I ask every guest. So first question is, what's an influential book or podcast that you'd recommend?
There's this book by Robert Cialdini called The Principles of Influence. He's a professor at Arizona State, and he basically came up with this book that had 6 universal principles that all human beings are influenced by. And what was cool about this book, he sold millions of copies, and it works across all cultures. And the way he did the research was not just looking at a lab, but he went out to what he called industries of influence, used car salespeople, Hare Krishnas, people who sell like Bible salesmen and stuff like that. And he's like, well, how does that work? And he came up with this seminal work that he published 20 years ago. And I think it's as relevant as ever to just understanding how human beings operate and think. So I'll throw that out there as one, not a business book. If you're looking for something on the climate, I think Bill Gates wrote a book where he basically took all of the emissions and he said, how do we solve climate change by methodically going through each category? It's part of what inspired me in that when I go back to perovskites are widely believed to be more than 90% of all future panels will be solar. And I think we've already established, I think most of new electrification will be solar. So when my wife said, do you want to look at some other jobs? I said, no, for me, this is the tip of the spear of solving climate change. That's why I picked it. But I think if someone wants to really understand where the emissions are coming from, what are the different solutions. I think Bill Gates' book came out a couple of years ago. I forget the name, but it was really good at just helping people understand climate change, breaking it down to its essence.
Yeah. No, super fascinating. I'll have to check both of those out. Second question here. What is your favorite thing to do outside of the office?
I love running. I've been running ever since I was in high school, and probably secondarily, I've been getting into pickleball like a lot of other people. So, and then travel be the number three. Of course, spending time with family, but those are the hobbies.
Yeah. Yeah. No, well, I guess on the travel part, what is third question here is what is your favorite vacation spot? And you probably have a lot to pick from with your world travels.
I think because I live in California, it's a direct flight to Hawaii. And the first time I went to Hawaii, someone told me I got invited to do speaking there. And I said no, because I'm like, oh, it's a boondoggle. My boss said, you've got to go to this conference. And then I went there and I thought, oh, I had this idea of Waikiki and being all tacky. But then I went there and I realized, God, it's one of the most beautiful places in the world. So
yeah.
Another reason to be blessed living in California is that you're a hop, skip, and a jump from Hawaii.
No, fair enough. Very cool. Well, I really appreciate the time and really appreciate your insight into, building this business and scaling it. I guess if people want to reach out and learn more about what you're doing, if they're in Silicon Valley and want to, see kind of how you're building this plant, what's kind of the best way to get in contact with you?
Scott at tandempv.com. Go to my LinkedIn profile or go to tandempv.com, go to our website and learn more.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, I really appreciate the time. We'll have all that stuff in the show notes. But Scott, thank you very much for the time. This has been a really awesome conversation.
Great. Thanks so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.
I hope you found at least one actionable insight from this episode of the Growth Capital Podcast, your one-stop shop for insights from private equity leaders, CEOs, and startup entrepreneurs on starting, investing in, and scaling successful businesses, as well as the role having the right talent plays in growing a successful business. It would be greatly appreciated if you would rate and review this podcast. And if you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe and drop us a comment so we can expand the audience of this podcast. Thank you for all your support, and don't forget about upcoming episodes dropping every Tuesday.